Brachim Habaim, welcome. I am Stephanie Bonder, Chair of the Israel Education Committee of Greater Metro West Global Connections. Thank you so much for joining us at Greater Metro West's first Unpacking Israel event. This year, we faced some unique challenges in our Israel engagement programming. And so, in our efforts to stay connected with our partners in Israel and with the Greater Metro West community, we found a creative way to live Israel through this new Unpacking Israel series. Tonight, we will be taking you on a special tour of Israel, focused on the dreamers and achievers who have put Israel on the global map. We are thrilled to have two of our favorite tour guides from when we last traveled in person to Israel for our mega mission in 2018, Liana Rothstein. Liana Rothstein and Zalman Spivak are here to lead us on this evening's virtual tour. Welcome, Liana and Zalman. It's so good to have you with us. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure to be here with you tonight, and we're going to start. As Stephanie mentioned, we are starting with a special session that we call Dreamers and Achievers. And Dreamers and Achievers, in fact, means that we're going to go through this idea of the people who dreamt many different ideas, beginning with Herzl, who dreamt the state, through the various different ideas that brought them to the creation of the state, and then where we are moving to in the future. There are many different dreams, not only the state, but dreaming energy and dreaming water and dreaming settling the Negev. There are many different concepts of the dreaming and achieving. You can see also by our opening slide the various different areas. Today we're going to touch only on a few of them. But in fact, we have various different sessions because we feel that in order to understand Israel of today, you have to first start a little bit back to understand the rationale behind. And so when we talk about dreaming and achieving, and of course, we start with Theodor Herzl, who of course said that if you will it, it is no dream. And if you don't, a dream it is, and a dream it will remain. And in this slide, you can see that we've chosen a few of the dreamers. Herzl and Eliezer Ben Yehuda, who dreamt Hebrew, and various other personalities who dreamt many things that in fact brought us to where we are today. And on the bottom, the colored pictures are the people who then took that dream and achieved it or turned it into a reality, and then take us into the next generation, if you will, or into the next century, as they now dream for today in order for us to see what will happen in the future. So we're going to start, of course, with our dear friend Theodor Herzl. We're going to start in Jerusalem, and here you have a map where you can see the old city, and you can see Mount Herzl and the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway. And when we talk about Mount Herzl, of course, we focus on Herzl and Herzl's burial place. Here you have an aerial view of Mount Herzl and the complex of what we call the Mountain of Memory. Up on the top left-hand corner, you can see Yad Vashem. And in the middle, you can see Herzl's grave and all those bleachers, because when this picture was taken, it was right before Yom HaAtzmaut, where we have our annual celebrations on top of Mount Herzl around his grave. And the whole wooded area that you can see around is our military cemetery, right? And Mount Herzl, or the Mountain of Memory, is basically where it all begins, right? With Herzl, the dreamer, who, as we said, if you will it is no dream. He is basically the man who, I would say almost single-handedly, of course with some help with others, changes the course of Jewish history. And if it weren't for him and for his relentless activities and actions, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today and having this incredible session of unpacking Israel and talking about the dreamers and achievers. So let's go to his famous book, Alt Neuland, where he basically outlines, right, his ideal of what this Jewish state is going to look like. And at the very end of the book, after his hero comes here and he describes the land in great detail in terms of what his vision is, he ends it with all then deeds of men are only dreams at first. And in the end, their deeds dissolve into dreams, right? You have to dream big, as you can see behind me. If you don't dream big, you ultimately are not propelled to then try to achieve. but the deeds are those that are going to bring you to dream. They're also going to bring you to ultimately make that dream become a reality. So Alt Noi land, old new land, in fact, is connected also physically with a place in Israel. So you have a map here, and the map shows you Jerusalem where we just were, and we're going to descend actually down to the coast. We're going to go down to the city of Tel Aviv. And when we go down to the city of Tel Aviv, we're actually going to focus on that sort of green wooded area that you can see, which if I bring you a little bit closer is Rothschild Boulevard. Okay, Rothschild Boulevard is one of the major streets in Tel Aviv, and it begins in the corner of Herzl and Rothschild, two giants who of course were responsible for dreaming, but also for propelling that dream and making it a reality. And this is what Rothschild Boulevard looks like today, right? And along Rothschild Boulevard, in fact, is also where Tel Aviv begins, right? Here you can see on the map again what we're looking at now from the other direction. And you can see that corner of Herzl and Rothschild Boulevard. What is that dream? Here, in fact, is where the dream begins, the dream of creating the city of Tel Aviv. And what does that have to do with our friend Herzl? Well, Alt Neu Land, in fact, means old new land. And although Herzl dies in 1904 and does not really, unfortunately, live to see his dream become a reality, only 2 years after his death, with the creation of the new city of Tel Aviv, there's a big debate, right? What they're going to call this city. And ultimately, the decision is that they want to name it in honor of Herzl. And what better way than to take his book that outlines the vision of what the Jewish state is going to look like, and to name the first modern Hebrew city in the land of Israel after that book, and to name it Tel Aviv, right? So Alt Neu, right? Even those of us who may not speak German, sounds very much like English. Alt, old, Neu, new. Okay, so if I were to translate it into words that you know today in Hebrew, I would have said Yashan Chadash. That doesn't sound very nice and flowery for a name of a city. And so they go to something more, I would say, literary. Tel is something very, very old, an archaeological mound with many different layers. So that represents the Alt, the old, right? And Aviv represents spring, rebirth, renewal. That represents the new. Alt, Noi, old, new. And then you get Tel Aviv. Okay, and here you have the picture of the 66 families who actually raffle, believe it or not, in order to be able to establish the city, right? Imagine getting 66 Jews together and having them not fight. That would actually be a miracle. So the only way to do that is to actually get them to have a lottery, and they send kids down to the beach. You see that it's all sand, right? And they get 66 shells, white shells for the names of the families, black shells for the numbers of the plots, and they raffle it out. And ultimately, out of the sand dunes is what we have today, right? We come back to Rothschild Boulevard, and actually right on this boulevard, the site of that raffle is also the site that many of you know, okay, as Independence Hall, as the place where the state of Israel was declared. So on this site, those sand dunes that you saw, in fact, is this building right over here. It ultimately ends up being the house of the Dizengoff family, who then becomes the first mayor of Tel Aviv. You can see him here at the bottom right-hand corner, riding his Mehira, okay, around the city. And when his wife dies, he dedicates his house to the city of Tel Aviv, turns it into the first art museum of Tel Aviv. And in this art museum is where, in 1948, the historic, epic event of the Jewish people is, in fact, the declaration of the state of Israel. What's amazing, if we go back to the dreamer, right, is that Theodor Herzl in 1897 in the first Zionist Congress in Basel says that he founded already the Jewish state, right? And he says, if I said it out loud today, people would laugh at me. But in 5 years, certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it, everyone will know it. Why? Because it is the people's will to become a state. And lo and behold, 50 years exactly, almost to the date, the state is declared in this famous hall that many of us are familiar with, and many of us have sat in this hall in the midst of a war, I remind you, basically changing the course of Jewish history forever, right? And the famous words with David Ben-Gurion, right, hitting the gavel and saying, I now declare the Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the state of Israel. That is that first step of the realization of Herzl's dream of creating the Alt Neu land, the old new land, into the actual Jewish state, the state of the Jews.
We dreamt a state, and we dreamt a city, and we built a city, and we built a state. And now we're back on the same boulevard, the Rothschild Boulevard. And now we're trying to look at the dreamers and achievers of the future that are taking place in the same boundaries, in the same square kilometer of Rothschild Boulevard. And the funny thing is that the people that are dreaming now the future is more on the entrepreneurship and innovations side of it. This is the most condensed startup nation area in the world. It's actually the highest value of venture capitalist dollars outside of Silicon Valley. And there's it comes for not for granted, but many banks actually started here at the beginning of Tel Aviv. There are close to 90 banks on this boulevard because if you were a Jew that came from Bialystok, you would never actually put your money in a bank of a Jew that came from Warsaw. So just around the corner from the same boulevard that we're actually touring right now is the Stock Exchange of Tel Aviv, which actually represents this next stage of those dreamers of achievers that is happening here in Tel Aviv. These youngsters that come out here after the army with these big ideas and are looking for other people to connect to bring their ideas into a startup and then to find the money to actually found it and then to bring it to the stock exchange, whether it's in Tel Aviv or the NASDAQ or anywhere else. And we actually want to walk through this boulevard and see a bunch of what's going on there. But before that, we ask ourselves, what is it in the Israeli that makes him innovative? What is it in the Israeli that makes him entrepreneur? Many people have asked this questions, and we're going to look at one or two quick answers. For instance, in this book that was written by Seth Siegel, which talks all about water, there's a great connection between the old and new. And he writes, Israel is both an old nation and a young country. That's this two sides of Tel Aviv, there's two sides of Old Neuland that we're looking at, with each part of this split personality contributing to the country's stability and success. Its millennia old tradition and attachment to the land of Israel provided a sense of rootedness and strength in a harsh, unforgiving terrain and region. The modern identity of the country, a new state that prizes fresh ideas and disruptive thinking, gives it restlessness that results in experimentation and comfort with change. These two sides of really feeling that this is the place I need to be in, my old land, yet I want to create something new, is what's pushing the envelope in today's modern dreamers and achievers on the same boulevard of Tel Aviv. Many people tried to answer what makes the Israeli such an innovator, and we went out to ask Inbal Arieli, which is an Israeli startup. Actually, she's a serial entrepreneur, and came up with a new book called Chutzpah, trying to answer this question. If other people answered it, it's the army, or our famous Yossi Vardi always answers that it's the Jewish mother that says guilt to his child, can't you give me more? She comes up with a different idea, and she says it's all about how we actually raise our children. So we actually want to meet her for a moment. We went out there and asked her, could you tell us what makes the Israeli such an entrepreneur today in the 21st century? And this is what we got back.
Dear friends of the Jewish community, I wish we could meet in person. Instead of you reading these Hebrew words, chutzpah, yalla, balagan, yeh beseder, from the screen. I'm in Tel Aviv at my home office, and unfortunately cannot visit you now due to COVID-19 restrictions. Still, I do want to share with you my thoughts. Ready?
Hi, I'm Inbal Arieli, born and raised in Israel on hummus and chutzpah. I served in 8200, an elite unit in the Israel Defense Forces. I'm a mother of 3 curious boys. I live in Tel Aviv, and I'm a serial tech entrepreneur, currently co-CEO of Synthesis, a startup I co-founded with US-based partners. I'm also the author of Chutzpah, Why Israel is a Hub of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I'm very glad to share with you that Chutzpah was recently selected as the best new entrepreneurship audiobook of 2020. This tiny country is raising generations of entrepreneurs. It is home to R&D offices of the world's leading giants, such as Google, Apple, Intel, and more. An origin of some of the world's most innovative inventions, the PillCam, Mobileye, Waze. But this might not be news to you. Here's the news. I wrote Chutzpah because I do not believe the common notion the success is the direct result of our technologically focused military or 2,000-year-old Jewish traditions of questioning. No, I think it's something else. As a Sabra, I believe that in today's modern Israel, our groundbreaking accomplishments in innovation and entrepreneurship are the result of something completely different. It's the way Israelis are brought up in a close-knit community where children are motivated to embrace challenges and ask questions, even bend the rules, where the only certain thing is uncertainty. Have you ever seen Israeli kids playing at a typical Israeli playground? It's noisy, chaotic, some might even say unsafe. Have you ever seen Israelis having a business discussion? Noisy, butting in, often more like a free-for-all. Israel's chutzpah-infused culture enables Israeli to constantly practice, from a very young age, soft skills that are now defined by the World Economic Forum as the skills for the future. I invite you to join me on a journey through a typical Israeli childhood. From the early days in kindergarten, childhood, and playtime, through what it means to be an Israeli teenager, to then becoming an Israeli soldier in a unique military, surprising environment. Join me in unpacking how modern Israel fosters the skills for the future.
Why was Chutzpah chosen as the best entrepreneurship audiobook for 2020? Because the skills and the mindsets it describes using the Israeli story are relevant for everyone, anywhere in the world, especially in times of global changes and uncertainty such as nowadays. And you should start practicing these skills today.
Well, as Inbal's book explains how a child in Israel becomes an innovator, I also think it explains how Israel is now innovating. How Israel started off as that child on the playground, even pre-state. In the beginning was creating a state and learning how it has the skills to continue. And now what is it doing with it? Our startup nation is taking it to the next level. And another quick quote before we move on, and really what is it in the Israeli that makes Tel Aviv such an entrepreneur environment? So this is out of the famous book of Startup Nation by Dan Senior and his brother-in-law Saul Singer. And he writes like this: Ben Gurion was the classic. Listen to this Hebrew word. It's a great Hebrew word, bitzuist, a Hebrew word that loosely translates to pragmatist, but with a much more activist quality. A bitzuist is someone who just gets things done. And he actually goes through the thread between the bitzuist that dried the swamps and creating the state is the same ethos, the same inside, the same drive of the bitzuist today that comes out of the army and says, you know what? I've got an idea and I'm going to make it happen. As we walk down this boulevard, which was sand dunes just 110 years ago, we're going to see where they were pushing the envelope in the 21st century. We're going to follow the arrows on the boulevard and see how many startups are just in this area, just by 3 or 4 buildings. So look at this corner of Herzl and Rothschild Boulevard, the meeting place. If I just walked up to the door and looked at the directory of what are the companies there, you could see an R&D company, you could see a digital company, you could see a venture capitalist company, just at the doors as we walk up. If I turn my head and I start going up the boulevard, this is that corner of the boulevard with the skyscrapers behind. You can see how Rothschild Boulevard is being built up as the economic center. And I move forward and I take a look at another building to my right. I could see a beautiful look on the left. This is what it looks. There's always a car parked. I can never get a picture of the building with with no car in front. And you look at the window and it says on it, iAngels. And you go closer and you ask, what's going on here? This is an investment firm, for first stage angel investments in venture capitalism, in startups, in entrepreneurship, in innovation in Tel Aviv. And if I went to the cafe at 12 o'clock in the afternoon before COVID, all you would see there is the people looking for that money. I move up a little bit on the boulevard and I go to Rothschild 22 and I just walk in. There's a hotel there. Look how beautiful the other buildings in the window. And I look at the directory and I look closely. I see Autodesk where they're printing 3D pieces for planes in that building. I see 4 floors of Facebook. I see, multinationals from all over the world. This is the environment those sand dunes from 100 years ago have turned into. I walk a little bit more up. I can see this beautiful, massive building called the Myers Building. The same building that you have in New York. He also built here on Tel Aviv, the Richard Myers Building on Rothschild Boulevard, with the top 3 floors, is the most expensive condo ever sold in Israel. And then I move a little bit along the boulevard and I see this beautiful eclectic building, a little bit different than in the international style, which used to be a hotel. And if I walk into it, I actually go up to a venture capitalist firm called Aleph. And one of the people leading this firm is a guy called Michael Eisenberg. He's one of the three partners, and he's actually distributing or investing over $50 million only on Israeli startups, mostly on this boulevard. So we actually walked up there to ask him, hey, Michael, give us a little bit about what you think about today in Israel, spending dollars and investing in Israeli companies. And this is what he gave us.
Good to see everyone. My name is Michael Eisenberg. As you hear from my accent, I'm actually originally American and not originally from Israel. I had the fine fortune of making Aliyah in 1993, which was coming out of 2 gap years that I did in Israel between 1989 and 1991 when the first Gulf War broke out. And at the end of that time, when I was in yeshiva, I got inspired by Rabbi Yehuda Amital, who said to me, you need to move to Israel and set up a factory that'll employ 10,000 people who can earn an honest and decent living. And that became a life pursuit in an attempt to help people in the state of Israel and people globally earn an honest and decent living and create those 10,000 jobs. It turns out it's not that easy to create 10,000 jobs, so I ended up with a lifelong pursuit. And the way I practice that is, for the last 25 years, I've been involved in the venture capital business in Israel in one form or another, investing in Israeli startup technology companies who hope to become global businesses. Some 7 years ago, together with my partner, Eden Shochat at the time, and now with a third partner, Aaron Rosenson, him too originally of the United States, we started a firm called Aleph. Aleph is a venture capital fund which manages above $500 million now, investing in Israeli startups that start in mostly Tel Aviv, but around the country, and export their products, services, and innovations around the globe. Some of them you may have even heard of. Companies like Lemonade Insurance, now publicly traded on NASDAQ, which innovated the world of insurance. It made it more aligned, made it more values-based. How do they make it more values-based? By saying, when your insurance company rejects your claim, they don't make more money. All insurance companies that you probably subscribe to, when they reject your claim, they make more money. In Lemonade's case, they take a fixed fee to manage the pool and use artificial intelligence and amazing technologies developed down the block here in Tel Aviv to innovate this hundreds of years old industry. Companies like Healthy.io, which can deliver a urine test to your home, where you pee in the same cup, use the same stick, but use your telephone to do the test instead of going to a lab and walking down the street. Or a company up the block here called Nexar, who delivers dash cams. You may have one of those in your car that looks at the road, but these are super intelligent dash cams using artificial intelligence, first of all, to map the cities, the world, the cars around us, and at the same time prevent car accidents, lower insurance premiums, and improve maps around the world. These kinds of innovations that are coming out of Tel Aviv and Israel in general are not only creating jobs locally, they're creating better lives for people around the world. You have a better insurance company, you have a better life. If we save your life on the road, you have a better life. If we have better health outcomes, because we can detect disease is by having you do your urine test at home, we can improve lives. And one of the most inspiring things about Israeli entrepreneurs is that what motivates them is the mission. It's not about making the money, it's about making the world a better place, providing people honest and decent livings, and providing people a chance for more welfare wherever they choose to live their lives. And I hope you'll come visit us when this COVID thing is over, because you ought to come see this innovation firsthand. It's truly inspiring. And these people of Startup Nation, these innovative people, are inspiring us all and helping me fulfill my personal goal of trying to employ 10,000 people. Come see us soon.
Wow. So it's with that kind of power and money and ambition that people are really pushing forward and making their dreams come true on Rothschild Boulevard. We love, Liana and I, whenever we go into these places, to look at their decor on the walls. There's always these cool and hip and vibe, statements. And one of the ones that we found is you can either say things are impossible, or you look at it and say, I'm possible. I can make things happen. I think that's a little bit about this behind the scenes of the Bitzuist, this Israeli vibe that's happening here on Rothschild Boulevard. And it goes to another level, and we're going to move it on to Liana to take it to the next level.
Okay, so if we spoke about high tech and startup innovation, one of the other things that Israel is involved in a very, very major way is social entrepreneurship, which is also a form of Bitzuism. And the Bitsuism is not just about the venture capitals, but also about, as you heard Michael say, making the world a better place, making Israeli society a better place. And here, again, we brought for you many different examples of people who are involved in social entrepreneurship in many, many different levels. Some of the names you may be more familiar with, some of them less familiar. You can see that we put next to each of them not only the name of the organization, but also part of the power is who they partner with in order to be able to make these dreams become a reality, in order to think, when Herzl thought about, Alt Neuland, what did that mean? What does it also mean from a social perspective? What can we do in order to make our social environment a better place? And it's just phenomenal. These are just really the tip of the iceberg of some of the amazing things that are going on in Israel. And we are actually going to go down to one of your partnership areas to talk about some of the social entrepreneurship that you guys are doing as well. So we're going to go down to Rishon, and you can see that Rishon LeZion is in fact just southeast of Tel Aviv, just a little bit away from the coast. And Rishon LeZion, in fact, also I would say epitomizes the idea of startup and dreaming and achieving. Israel, in fact, if you will, is one big startup, right? This big innovative idea of creating a Jewish state. And within that, the very first community that takes that dream and makes it a reality is in fact Rishon LeZion, which is why it's called Rishon LeZion, the first to Zion. And when it was started in 1882, it was also all on sand dunes, and quite phenomenal to think that from this, with the sands and the synagogues and the few houses and the people walking the street, we turn to this amazing, phenomenal, metropolitan, huge area. Today, the 5th largest city in Israel, with over 250,000 people living in it. Today, spreading all the way out to the coast, to the Mediterranean, although it started near where that red dot is, where it says Rishon LeZion. And we are actually going to zoom in Rishon LeZion to the neighborhood where you are partnered, Ramat Eliyahu neighborhood, where you can see that it is located. And I'm going to turn it over to Minden in order to share with you a little bit of what you guys are doing in Ramat Eliyahu as part of the social entrepreneurship and the way you guys are partnering with them in order to change the future. So Minden, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Minden Rose, and I'm a member of the Israel Education Committee. Rishon LeZion Ramat Eliyahu is the first partnership community of Greater Metro West in Israel. It was started more than 40 years ago and continues to thrive today. Over the years, Greater Metro West has supported many programs and projects in the neighborhood. In the last 2 decades, our focus has been on helping integrate the many Ethiopian Israeli families who chose Ramat Eliyahu as their first home in Israel. One of the most exciting programs that we support is Yahel, in which youth from around the world come for 1 year to live and volunteer in the heart of Ramat Eliyahu. We will meet some of them who recently arrived in Ramat Eliyahu despite the pandemic, and we will learn about their impact in the community as agents resist social change.
Welcome to the Ramat Eliyahu neighborhood of Rishon LeZion. Rishon LeZion is indeed a huge city now, the 4th largest in Israel. But Ramat Eliyahu is still keeping its very unique, intimate, and Hamish nature. Ramat Eliyahu is also the first partnership community of our Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey. This partnership has started some 45 years ago, and since then, we were involved in hundreds of programs and projects, activities, visits, and encounters. During the last 2 decades, a large number of Ethiopian Jewish families have settled in Ramat Eliyahu, and our efforts as partners focused on integrating them better into the mainstream Israeli society. The Ethiopian Jewish community is a wonderful community with rich culture, amazing heritage, and heroic Zionist story. But the absorption and integration efforts are quite challenging, as they leave a third world African country and within hours find themselves in a totally different culture in the modern startup nation of what Israel now is. In partnership with the municipality of Rishon LeZion, the government of Israel, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Joint Distribution Committee, and many other partnered organizations, our federation is helping meet this challenge for many decades. We have built the Matnas, the community center of Ramat Eliyahu, many years ago, and since then it served along with the Feinberg Center as our hub for many programs and projects. The walls of this community center are telling the story of our partnership. Another flagship program of our federation here is Atzmaut Plus, a unique initiative empowering Ethiopian Israeli families to become independent. But perhaps the most inspiring evidence of our partnership right now is the fact that in spite of COVID, a group of young adults from all over the world decided to spend the year in Ramat Eliyahu, live in the neighborhood, volunteer in the community, and involve themselves in true social action. They are the Yahel Fellows.
The Yahel Social Change Program is a 9-month service learning program. We have been working in the Ramat Eliyahu neighborhood in Rishon LeZion for 6 years. We just started our 7th year here. We have an incredibly diverse cohort from all over the world. We do not take it for granted for 1 minute that they arrived and that they are here and that they are not only here despite COVID, but they're actually going to be very effective and helpful to the community during these times. We've had a wonderful partnership with the Metro West Federation for the last 6 years. It's been wonderful to see the real kind of person-to-person connection. I think with Metro West, it's not only words, we see it for real.
You are here in a neighborhood that is connected to the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West for the last 42 years. And the fact that you are here and you came from all corners of the world to be here during these very challenging times is very appreciated. So thank you.
I came to Yahel so I could continue doing what I did back home, which is social work, but in a completely alien setting, and yet be able to find common ground, feel at home, and help the people of Ramat Eliyahu as much as I can.
I really wanted to immerse myself into the Hebrew language and the Israeli culture, and with Yahel, I found a way to do that, plus to offer to the community on the things that I've studied, which is education, and also to see Israel in its true and bare form.
Immerse myself into the Israeli culture and to improve my Hebrew skills. I also came to Yahel to offer my youth work skills to the community and to make a difference for all the children.
I want to get to know Israel on a deeper level, contribute to and also learn from the community in Ramat Eliyahu.
So we dreamt the state, we dreamt the city, we built a state, we built a city, we built startups. We're pushing the envelope of social entrepreneurship. Now we're moving to the next dream. This is the dream of dreaming, achieving the Negev, 60% of Israel. Okay, how do we dream and achieve the Negev? And we're going to start with the great dreamer and achiever of the Negev, and that is our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. This is his grave tombstone, him and his wife, Paula. It's Ben-Gurion looking out to the Tzin Valley. It's an unbelievable place. Just the thought that he could be next to Herzl on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem, and he chose to be buried with this as his view. And if we went back to his tombstone, you can see there's only 3 things he has to be written on his tombstone: where he was, the year he was born, the year he made Aliyah, and the day he died, because making Aliyah was being reborn. And I want to go a little bit deeper before we go into his dreaming and achieving. If I would put you in a committee and say you have to commemorate David Ben-Gurion, and I'm giving you a banknote, and you're going to commemorate him on the banknote, and on the back of his head of the banknote, you need to put a specific, picture that represents him. I would guess that one of the pictures you might would put behind is him declaring the state of Israel. But if you see the banknote that was actually issued for him, actually has this view that we're looking at in the back of his head. It has the view of the Midreshet Ben-Gurion, the Ben-Gurion Institute in the Negev that was founded when he was still alive, because they were actually looking at his dream for the future and not actually telling the story of his accomplishments of the past, because David Ben-Gurion's massive dream was the future, and his dream for the future was in this place called the wilderness of the Negev, the Tzin Valley, maybe this place where he connected with the biblical story of the children of Israel coming outside coming out of Egypt and into the land of Israel. And if we go into some of his writings, he writes, if the state does not liquidate the desert may liquidate the state. It's not only a physical desert, he's talking also spiritual, he's talking about economic, social, but let's talk about the physical desert that he fell in love with in 1953 and came down there and pushed the envelope and said, you know what, this is where the future of Israel is actually going to happen. So let's look at the Negev. It's a whole bottom part of the state of Israel. This is a bird's eye view of the country of Israel. We're going to talk about the whole lower part of the land of the state, the southern part of it. I want to zoom in a little bit and show you that it actually is totally desert. 60% of Israel is desert. When I say desert, below 200 millimeters of rain a year, that's below 8 inches of rain a year. You cannot even grow wheat. It's a place that's desolate. It's a place that has no future when it comes to agriculture. And this is where we're going to try to change that. You can see the major cities. It's 60% of the land mass of Israel. It's a massive area, okay, not to have anybody living in it. If you go back to Tel Aviv, the Gush Dan has over 2 million people living just in that area. And look how little people we have here between Beersheba, the north of the Negev, okay, only 210, today 220,000 people living in Beersheba, the middle of the Negev, Mitzpe Ramon, very small little town, and the most southern tip of the Negev, Eilat, was just over 50,000 people. It's a tourist city, 9% of the population, which lives in 60% of the land mass of Israel. Let's go a little bit forward and see some of his dreams and see how this becomes real. He writes, the South and the Negev were the cradle of our people, and they are its greatest hope. This is where we were created. We were created in the desert. We became an Am, a people in the desert. We were given a covenant in the desert. This is where we got to learn how to create our future. Our future is connected with the vast agriculture settlement in the Negev and with the beginning of the Jewish labor and entrepreneurship. How does that all happen? Where did this all happen? Where do people start selling? Who's the first dreamers and achievers? So I'm going to go back to the first settling of this area, which are on this map. You can see these 3 mitzpim, these 3 communities called Gvulot, Beit Eshel, and Revivim, which was way deep south in 1943 when they were created. They were created in the middle of nowhere. Actually, Revivim was a kibbutz that was created in Rishon LeZion. It was a group of people that lived in Rishon LeZion. They said to them, you want to create a kibbutz? Go down south. This is what it literally looked like. Nobody wanted to go there. The 3 first founders or settlers of Revivim found a cave from the Nabatean period and lived in the cave until they literally built what they will call later on the Tira, the castle that they lived in, what you could see in Mitzpe Revivim. And you could see the bottom picture. We went there just last week, and you can see what's happening to it today in the desert and how green it is. So you can already get the end of the story that it really worked. In 1946, they were accompanied by another 11 kibbutzim and yeshuvim. This was called the 11 points of the Negev that settled here against the British, under the nose of the British. Motzei, when Yom Kippur, the end of Yom Kippur, without anybody knowing, they moved into the Negev. And if you look at the bottom, we left Revivim that was put there in 1943. Even after the next 11 communities joined the Negev in 1943, Revivim was so south and so on its own. And if you ask yourself, what is it? How do you actually create a kibbutz? So don't ask yourself, just go to the newspaper of the time. This is the Davar newspaper of the workers union, or the workers community, the Po'alim of Israel, September 6, 1946. And they have a special edition of this newspaper. And what does the special edition of the newspaper tell you? It says how to establish a settlement in the wilderness. You know, it's a 101 dummies for creating a kibbutz in the Negev. How do you actually make that happen? And if you look at the bottom of this picture, it actually says the Jewish settlements are a flourishing garden on the border of a wasteland. And then it has a question: will the land remain a wasteland? Here's the question of the dreamers and achievers: will we make this bloom, or will it stay a desert place? And if you ask yourself again, how do we do that? Look at the songs that were written at the time, okay? Called Dunam Po Dunam Sham. A foot here and a foot there. I'm talking about a foot of a person, I'm talking about the size, right? I will tell you, listen to the words I'm reading to. I will tell you, little girl, and you, little boy. They sing to themselves in the kibbutzim, right? How it is in the land of Israel. Land is redeemed. Listen to that word. A dunam here, a dunam there. A little bit and a little bit. You buy another one, you plow another piece of land, you build another house. Clump by clump. That is how we redeem our people's land, from north to south. I see the music might come on. If not, you'll get it in your package that you can listen to the music and hear a little bit of what it is. Look how this continues into 1947 when the UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee for Palestine, comes to survey this land, and they have to give us a map. What will become the Jewish land and what will become the Arab land? They're going to split this land when the British leave. The map is what you see on the left, and everything in green will become the Jewish land. They literally give us wasteland, the Negev. How does that happen? You could see the pictures of these members of the UNSCOP visiting that kibbutz. Remember, it was just founded in 1943 in the middle of nowhere, this kibbutz called Revivim, and Revivim was growing gladiolas. They were growing flowers in the middle of nowhere. And one of the people turns to them and says, I don't believe that these are true. You literally planted them for us. He bends down, a member of the committee, and pulls out a flower out of the ground, and he sees, oh my God, these Jews are growing flowers in the desert. They're achieving something. And he says, you know what? This is going to give you the desert. The Champagne pipelines are the pipelines that brought the water, the flowers, the desert. They called them Champagne pipelines. They were so expensive. They were bought from England that used them to put out the fires in London after the Blitz. Look what David Ben-Gurion says. Without this pipeline, we wouldn't be able to hold onto the Negev. And I don't know if we would even be able to dream about defending the Negev. And one of the members of the UNSCOP said, this water pipe will give you guys the Negev. And lo and behold, because of those settlements in the Negev in 1947 and 48, when we declare a state, we're given the Negev. And the last operation of the War of Independence, called Operation Uvda, when they're sitting already in the ceasefire discussions in Rhodes, and David Ben-Gurion turns around to the heads of the army and says, rush down to Eilat. The Negev is not in our hands. And two of the army brigades, the Golani Brigade and the Negev Brigade, rush all the way down to Eilat. And the war ends with this famous picture called the ink flag on the shores of Rashrash, where they actually wait 2 days. They issue a letter back to the government of Israel that we notify the government of Israel on the Yud Aleph Badar, a famous Zionist day, the day of the falling of Trumpeldor up north. And they say, we hereby present the Negev and the Gulf of Aqaba and Eilat to the government of State of Israel. And here we achieved and we actually received the Negev. But what do you do with that? How do you move it forward? That's a whole nother different question. We went to ask one of those people that fought during that war. Not only did he fight during that war, he was one of the families that moved into Revivim. Revivim was so isolated that most of the people that were members that were supposed to move into that kibbutz gave up and went to create another kibbutz. And they had to bring other people to move into Revivim. And Oded Barzilai is one of the founders. He is 91 years old today. We went to meet with him and hear a little bit, and we think it's exciting to hear how the first generations of dreamers and achievers created the Negev. So here's a short clip with Oded. It's quite, there's some Hebrew, so you can follow the translation.
My name is Oded Barzilai. במלחמת העצמאות שבה השתתפתי בתור לוחם פלמ"ח בגדוד הראשון, באחד הימים בא אלינו לאחד המשלטים טבנקין והסביר לנו שברביבים המצב קשה מאוד. היישוב הולך להתפרק, נשארו כאן מעט מאוד אנשים וגם חלק מהם רוצה לעזוב, והמשימה שלנו היא ללכת ולבנות את רביבים. אני התחתנתי 20 פחות חודש. הייתי כל כך צעיר. אגב, אני לא הייתי היחידי שהתחתן צעיר. רבים מהחברים שלי שהיו איתי במלחמה ובאו לרביבים התחתנו בגיל צעיר אחרי שנה של מלחמה. חברים שנהרגו ונפצעו וחלק נפצע, גם אני ביניהם. היה רצון חזק מאוד לבנות משפחה ושיהיה מקום חם ולהיות בו אחרי כל מה שעברנו. הדסה שלי, אשתי, היא הייתה רפתנית, והיו שולחים את הקדים עם החלב לתנובה באר שבע, ומחזירים מבאר שבע בקדים מים מתוקים. כי היו כאן אנשים וילדה אחת שאסור היו חולים בכליות ואסור היה להם לשתות מים מליחים. אז במים המתוקים שהיו מביאים באר שבע, זה היה טוב בשבילם. זה מצחיק להגיד מה שאני אגיד, אבל האתגר הראשון שלנו היה שיהיה לנו חדר משלנו. ולא היה מקום. אמרו שאתם יכולים לגור עם עוד מישהו ביחד, קראו לזה פרימוס. לאיש היו גרים או עם עוד אחד, עם עוד שניים. וכמובן שרצינו להיות לבד, ואז הייתה פה מרפאה בחדר אחד, ואנחנו הסכמנו לגור על המיטה במרפאה, עם כל הארונות הלבנים של התרופות, וכל המשחות והכל, ואמרו לנו בתנאי שאם יהיה מקרה שצריך לטפל בו, זה עדיפות ראשונה. אנחנו קפצנו למציאה והסכמנו, וזה היה חדר המשפחה הראשון שלנו ברביבים. והיינו מאושרים. אז אני גאה, מאושר, שיש לי כאן משפחה של 4 דורות, כי זה מוכיח שהחלום שלנו והרצון להקים כאן יישוב הצליח. הגאווה שלי היום על רביבים היא מכל הבחינות. כל מה שצריך ביישוב, וכמובן שבתי ילדים, ואני אגלה לכם שבזמן האחרון נראה לי שכל בחורה שנייה או שלישית היא הגלגלה, היא בהיריון. כמובן משמח מאוד, מעודד מאוד, כי זה אומר שאנשים רואים את המקום כמקום קבע, לא כמקום העבר. יש לי מה להתגאות, וגם בתור איש מבוגר, שאני עוד מעט בן 91. זאת אומרת, אני כבר פה כ-71 שנה. אני יכול לומר שהחברה ברביבים מטפלת בנו, במבוגרים, בצורה בלתי רגילה. מה שאני מאחל לדור הצעיר זה, חבר'ה, תיקחו את התפקידים, תיקחו את הניהול, תיכנסו כאן לכל העבודות שישנם, בחקלאות, בתעשייה, וגם אפשר ללמוד להיות מהנדסים, טכנאים, אדריכלים, אנשי מדע, ולעבוד בסביבה. ביי ביי, תודה רבה ושלום.
So amazing to be able to hear from the founding generation. You know, these people are not many of them left, and so to be able to hear in their own words what their experience was to come and settle the Negev and really be those dreamers is really amazing. So if we take that dream now one step forward and we go now after the state is established and the dream of now settling the Negev, we have all of these new communities that are established in the 1950s, amongst them, of course, also Ofakim, your partnership area. And you can see that there are various different towns that are established with immigrants, Olim, that are coming from Europe, coming from North Africa, coming from the Arab countries. And the numbers, if they were little in the beginning, are now growing, and of course, creating a denser, greater population in the Negev. But what were the conditions that they had to deal with initially, right? When they were there to first realize that dream, they come and they live in these transit camps, in tents, in very, very difficult, stark conditions. The tents then turn into these little huts, and eventually those huts turn into towns. And we have all of these different towns that we mentioned before, Mitzpe Ramon and Ofakim, your partnership community, and Yerucham and Netivot and Dimona, and they're all growing and developing and taking that dream now to the next level. And this is what Ben Gurion said when he went down to the Negev in the early 50s, when he wanted to see his dream becoming a reality. I've just returned from my first visit to Dimona, and I am drunk from joy and amazement from all that I saw. In my opinion, we must bring every tourist to Dimona to see what the Jews of Morocco and the Jews of Israel have done with this desolate, barren desert. You can change Dimona to Ofakim, to Netivot, to any of them. The idea being, we must bring people down here to see this incredible dream becoming a reality. And then we take it to the next level, because he goes down to the Negev also in order to inaugurate this road that we all know famously now right underneath the Bereshit Hotel, the road that drives through Machtesh Ramon. It was opened in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, as a road down to Eilat. And on his way back to Tel Aviv, after inaugurating the road, he sees these cowboys. The picture down below I know looks like out west in America, but in fact, this is the Negev, all right? And he sees these young people and he says, who are you? What are you doing here? Who sent you? Which one of the movements sent you? And they said, no, we came on our own. We fought here and we wanted to settle here. And they established Kibbutz Sde Boker. He goes back to Tel Aviv, writes them a famous letter and says he wants to join them. And ultimately he moves down to Sde Boker and he wants to help transform the wilderness into settlements. In my opinion, it is no less important than being a prime minister. And so we follow the old man down to the Negev. And we saw that that dream wasn't only in living in the Negev, but it meant dying and being buried there so people continue to follow him even after his death. But in order to build and transform the wilderness into that green, flourishing environment, we need water, right? And you cannot, in fact, settle the Negev without water. You heard Oded talking about the brackish water and the fresh water that had to be schlepped all the way from Beersheba. So in fact, we go back to our dreamers. Herzl already talked about the importance of water in Alt-Neuland. And together with Herzl, there are two other major dreamers and achievers of the water, and that is Levi Eshkol, who will be our prime minister during the days of the 6-Day War, and Simcha Blas, who he works with Levi Eshkol in order to implement this idea of bringing the water, right? So Levi Eshkol already, when he was living in Degania, sees the importance of schlepping the water, creating pipelines that are going to bring the water to the communities. He is the mastermind, together with Simcha Blas, who built the national water carrier, and they are also responsible for bringing water down to the Negev, right? Every drop of water that fell from the heavens was exploited for the public good. Milk and honey once more flowed in the ancient home of the Jews. That is Herzl, right? And ultimately, they take that and they turn it into reality. So you can see here that already in the 1940s, there is that first pipeline that is bringing water down to the Negev in order to help make those communities bloom. And when they talk about building the national water carrier in the 1960s, and of course it created a whole geopolitical issue. This is the eve already of the 6-Day War. The Syrians are not happy, the Jordanians are not happy, but you see that we even then already had strong ties with the American administration. And you can see that Eric Johnson was the ambassador for the water, all right? He's standing here with Simcha Blas, overlooking the Jordan Valley, talking about building the national water carrier. And as part of that, there is also the Yarkon Negev project to bring that water down to the Negev in order to make the Negev bloom. One of the other major dreamers of this issue of water is a man by the name of Yoel de Malach, also one of the early settlers of Tel Aviv. He is not only the father of many of the agricultural developments, but he understood that using that brackish water is a way for us to be able to take advantage of a larger water resource so that we leave the fresh water for drinking water. He ends up being a recipient of the Israel Prize for this incredible achievement of understanding how to use the water resources to make the Negev bloom. One of the incredible concepts of water is this song that was written by Shlonsky in 1949, right after the War of Independence. Remember the map that Zalman showed you before with the 3 mitzvim and the 11 communities. They are isolated, there is no water. And this song talks about, have you heard how in the Negev, a land facing heaven, prays clod by clod, give us water, 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 bring us water, for we're thirsty, right? And so we have here a kibbutz that comes together to sing this song. It's almost like a prayer, like chanting so many years later, still remembering this concept of how they need water. We're just going to listen very briefly because the power of the community, even so many years later, remembering this need for water is something that is worth hearing just for a few moments. that chant for that water, Havu lanu mayim, give us water. And so from that chant, from that yearning, look what happens, how that dream becomes a reality. We build reservoirs in order to collect the runoff rainwater, in order to be able to use that for the irrigation, to be able to make the desert bloom. But not only that, we talked about innovation, right? And the Yiddish cup, right? So the idea of how can we take the water, but also use it smartly and use it in a way that we don't waste, but we maximize that. Okay, and so again, we go back to our friend Simcha Blas, who was walking around one day in one of the kibbutzim and saw that the pipes were giving water, but there was one tree that was bigger than all the other trees. And when he looked closely, he saw that the pipe there actually had a little hole and it was dripping water. And therefore that tree was getting more water than the other trees, which made it bigger and taller than everything else. And out of that dream, we have Netafim, the large conglomeration of water that basically today is an international, right, company that brings water in an economic way all over the world. Right, and from that, we also then take it one step further, and that is reclamation of water. Israel is the world leader in purifying and recycling water. Over 90% of our water is recycled and is used. And just so you get an understanding, the next country after us is Spain, and they're just over 20% in their recycling. So when we talk about thinking, it's amazing. But if that's not enough, we talk about the lands of miracles. WaterGen actually creates water from the air. Okay, you take the moisture in the air and lo and behold, whoops, you get water that you can actually drink, and you don't need a lot of humidity. So even in Africa, in some of the driest, hottest countries, WaterGen has placed these amazing machines where from the air, you can in fact create water. So such an incredible thing that even at the Kotel, right? When you go and put your note in the wall, you don't anywhere have to pray for water. Here you have water from the air. Havu lanu mayim, right? Give us water. This is that achievement and taking the water into the next generation.
So the next thing that's happening in the Negev, we're going to do it really briefly, is that 60% of the Negev is desert. That's why we have a lot of army. Everywhere you go in the Negev, you see beware army. And this is being changed in the way the army uses the land, but also in where the army is in the land. And that's the relocation of the army from the center of Israel. This is what you see when you drive through most of the Negev. And when you drive in your car and you look in your rear view mirror or in the front, a lot of times this is what you're going to see. Be careful, tanks are crossing the road. How is this being changed today? Because we want to bring the dream down there. Israel's relocating bases down there. So the major 4 bases that are coming down there is the intelligence base, the cyber base, the training base, and the new Air Force base. This is bringing new people from the center of Israel that are permanent workers of the army or the IDF to the south. This is boosting, okay, many things. If you go forward, you'll be able to see the big base. This is our training base called the Ariel Sharon base, right there in the Negev, in the center of the Negev. And this is actually bringing, new housing momentum, boosting economy, education, health, new roads to boost the South. Together with that, we need youngsters. We need the young generation to stay. And for there, we're going to go down to see another partnership area of yours. And that's the area of Merchavim and of Ofakim. You can see where it is what we call the northern western Negev, everything between Beersheba and the Gaza Strip. We marked here Ofakim for you. We're going to zoom in a little bit more so you could see it. I like to look at this picture for 2 reasons. In the top right map, you could see the municipality borders of Merchavim, which is your partnership region, and in the center of it sits the city of Ofakim. You can see to the west the Gaza Strip. You can see how close it is to the Gaza Strip with all of its challenges. What you can also see is how rural it is and how how farming it is with this urban base of Ofakim itself. And I'm going to turn it over so we can look at the Ofakim program. Just right before I turn it to Miriam, one of the things Ben-Gurion says is he stresses the idea that in order to achieve the future of the Negev, we need to achieve it through the youth, the youngsters, right? The next generation have to move down here and push this dreaming and achieving forward. And that's one of the things we're going to look at as we dive into this ongoing standing partnership between Metro West and the region. So Miriam.
Shalom, everyone. I'm Miriam Seiden, and I am a proud member of the Israel Education Committee. I'm thrilled to introduce the next part of our tour of Israel. Ofakim Merchavim is one of Greater Metro West partner communities, which I have had the pleasure of visiting and spending some high quality time in. and falling in love with the people and the community 25 years ago, Federation answered a request to partner with the town of Ofakim. Since then, we have developed a very unique relationship with Ofakim and the Regional Council of Merchavim. We have conducted many programs and projects over the years and are extremely proud of our living bridges that developed between our two communities.
ברוכים הבאים, welcome to Ofakim. This development town in the western Negev desert was founded in the early days of Israel as a service center for the nearby agriculture communities, the Moshavim. As part of Ben-Gurion's vision to make the Negev bloom, many Olim, new immigrants, were settled in Ofakim throughout the years, mainly from North Africa and the FSU. Life in Ofakim was never easy. In the first few decades, the peripheral nature, the low socioeconomic situation, and the location not far from Gaza Strip made it quite challenging. And yet, these pioneers, the Chalutzim of the Negev, didn't give up and made it possible. They were able to overcome the many obstacles and create a wonderful community. Exactly 25 years ago, Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West was asked by then Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Zichrono Livracha, and the Jewish Agency for Israel to partner with Ofakim and the nearby Regional Council of Merchavim. Since then, our partnership became a national renowned model for enhancing Israel-diaspora relations. While at first the focus was economic development and financial support, soon enough it was shifted to education, community empowerment, Jewish peoplehood, and people-to-people relations. The living bridges, the bonds that were created between residents of Ofakim, Merchavim, and Greater Metro West are long-lasting. Over the years, our partnership was involved in many programs and activities in town. Some of our most meaningful activities include bringing high-end art and culture to Ofakim through the Music Center, the Igloo Art Station, and Bezalel Art Academy. Enhancing quality education in Hagiv'ah School, working with at-risk kids through the Laulich Center and Youth Futures, empowering youth movements and grassroots community organizations. And last but not least, our signature initiative, the Peoplehood Project. But perhaps the most rewarding accomplishment after 25 years of partnership is to watch Ofakim growing and changing its image. Ben-Gurion's vision is finally fulfilled, and Greater Metro West is there in person to accompany it. Ofakim is tripling its population in the coming decade. New neighborhoods and public facilities are rapidly built into the Negev desert. A fairly new train station and fast highways are connecting the region to the center of Israel and reversing its peripheral image. Many young families are choosing Ofakim to be their home. The Young Adult Center is telling this success story. It is serving the growing population of youngsters who either grew up here and decided to stay or choose to move to Ofakim and build their life here. Let's meet with some of them.
אני מור בועדנה, בת 32, נשואה לעודד המתוק, גם נולדתי, התחנכתי, גדלתי באופקים, ואני היום אחראית על התחום של מעורבות חברתית וקהילה במרכז צעירים אופקים.
אני נדב, אני בן 34, אני תושב אופקים, נולדתי וגדלתי באופקים, ואני מנהל את הקולנוע באופקים. אני פעיל חברתי בתחום התרבות.
אני טל מגירה, בן 31 מאופקים, נולדתי וגדלתי פה, נשוי לניצן. אני היום מנהל קהילה במושבי יחדיו במועצה אזורית בני שמעון, ואני חבר מועצה באופקים, וחבר של נדב ומור. בחרתי להשתקע באופקים, כי אני חושב שיש פה המון הזדמנויות, גם לנו כצעירים, ולנו בכלל כאנשים. יש פה אוכלוסייה מדהימה, יש פה הרבה מקום ליצור יוזמות וליצור דברים טובים ולהגשים חלומות, וזה מה שאנחנו עושים כאן.
האמת שכולם חשבו שאני אעזוב את אופקים. בחרתי באהבה רבה להישאר פה ולייצר דברים ולהניע ולהוביל במסוגלות שלי, יחד עם עוד הרבה אנשים טובים מסביב.
אחרי שלמדתי קולנוע, התחלתי ליצור סרטים וגם להתחיל במיזם קולנוע בעיר שלי באופקים, על מנת להקים קולנוע באופקים. אני מבחינתי, תודעתית, ממוקם באזור מרכזי, כך שאם אני רוצה ליצור או לעשות איזושהי פעילות חברתית, אני לא צריך להזיז את עצמי למרכז כדי לעשות אותה, אני יכול לעשות אותה כאן באופקים, בטח בעידן של מוביליות חברתית מאוד מאוד נוכחת.
היום ב-2020 אופקים מונה 35,247 תושבים, אז לגמרי גדלנו. ואני באמת צופה את ההתפתחות הזאת של הגירה חיובית לאופקים, בין אם זה תושבים חדשים ובין אם זה בנים חוזרים או חבר'ה צעירים שבוחרים להישאר. עתיד העיר הזאת ובכלל הנגב לגמרי תלוי בכוח הצעיר.
בעוד 10 שנים אופקים תהיה עיר משגשגת, שתהיה מרכז תרבותי לכל הנגב המערבי, עם חינוך מאוד טוב, עם תשתיות מאוד טובות, ושכונות וקהילות משגשגות ומיוחדות.
אני מאחלת לעיר שלנו שהחבר'ה הצעירים יישארו פה וייכנסו לתפקידים מובילים ויניעו מהלכים טובים וחדשניים בעיר, ירעננו את הדברים, יפריחו את השממה as it sound.
מקום שהוא כל אחד רוצה להיות בו ולבקר בו ולראות גם אם זה תיירות וגם אם זה מרכז תרבותי כזה או אחר. אני לפחות שואף לשם, אני מכוון למקום הזה ואני מאוד מאמין בזה.
הרבה יותר משרות, הרבה יותר הזדמנויות, תעסוקה שהיא פה בנגב, במקום שלנו.
יהיה פה מרכז חדש, נוסף, משמעותי של מדינת ישראל, שאופקים גם תהיה חלק מרכזי מתוכו.
היא אופקים שהיא שוקקת מבחינה תרבותית, מבחינה עירונית ומרחבית.
אז אני באמת מאמינה שיחד עם שותפים טובים שרוצים למנף את הנושא של ההתיישבות בנגב והפיתוח הנגבי האזורי, אופקים תעלה מעלה. זה כבר קורה ובעזרת השם אני מאחלת לעיר שזה גם ימשיך להיות בטורים גבוהים כל הזמן.
We're going to end with the last quote from Shimon Peres, which says, "Count the number of dreams you have and compare them with the number of achievements you've had. If you have more dreams than achievements, then you are still young." I think as a Jewish community in the state of Israel, we're young. And as you saw, we're dreaming and achieving together. And with this dreaming and achieving, we'll be able to bloom the Negev and push Israel for the next 70 years future. Dream big, as it says outside the Paris Center for Innovation and Peace. This is what we're looking at. Hope you join us for more dreamers and achievers in the future. And I'm going to turn it over to Yael to give us some closing statements.
Thank you, Zalman. Hey, everyone. My name is Yael Birin. I'm a proud member of Israel Education Committee. And just a few closing comments before we wrap for tonight. First and foremost, we hope you enjoyed our first Unpacking Israel tour. I loved the comments in the chat. Thank you for that. Thank you, Liana and Zalman, for a great program. We are committed to building meaningful connections, living bridges, as we like to call them, between our Jewish community and our partners in Israel and around the world. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. What's next? So on December 13th, we have our community Hanukkah celebration and candle lighting. After that, our next Unpacking Israel event as part of this series will be January 6th, where we will share an Israeli culinary experience with all of you. Yum, yum. The Jewish Federation of North America is launching a matching campaign to raise over $54 million to increase our efforts. So every new and additional dollar donated to the 2021 UJA annual campaign by December 31st will be matched at 50%. For example, this means an increase of $1,000 becomes $1,500. So well worth it. Last but not least, please be on the lookout for a follow-up email, which will include our survey about this program. We are looking forward to hearing your feedback about that. Thank you for joining us, wishing you a happy Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you at our Hanukkah event on December 13th.